Chapter 8. The Story of Human Action. I should know human action very well. I typed 890 pages of it, and after the index was finished, I checked it. Lou was a very strict boss, at least with me. Whenever he saw a typing error, he made me redo the whole page, exactly as I had to do at the Delahanty School of Business. Erasing was strictly prohibited there, and so it was with Lou. It is no news to most of my readers that Human Action is the English revised edition of Nationale Economie, published in Geneva in 1940. Nationale Economie was published in 1980 in a new edition by Philosophia Inc., Munich. The war did great harm to the book. In spite of excellent reviews, it never reached German-speaking countries, and the Swiss publishing firm did not survive the war. In 1942, when we were only partly settled in our new apartment in New York, Lou started planning on a revised English edition. It was not a translation, since the new book refers much more to American than to European conditions, and it was greatly enlarged. He worked for many years on it. Each day I could type only a certain number of pages, as my days were filled with many other tasks. That is how I came to live with Human Action as well as with Lou. It was part of my life as well as his, and I shared all the joys and the disappointments that the coming years brought. Human Action meant more to Lou than all the work he did before or after, and therefore he suffered more by the maltreatment of his work by the Yale University Press when they published the second edition than he had ever suffered before. But I don't want to anticipate events. I shall describe them chronologically and thus make it easier for the reader to understand how the book was created, how many difficulties there were to overcome until it was finally printed, and the real suffering Lou had to go through when he saw Human Action, the most important contribution of his created life, mutilated in its second edition. Lou's first contact with the Yale University Press involved his omnipotent government, and he was directed to Yale by Henry Hazlitt. When I look through the files, I see more clearly than ever how much Henry Hazlitt has done, and is still doing, to spread my husband's ideas. In the first years of our stay in America, Harry, himself a busy and hard-working man, read all of Lou's manuscripts and corrected them, a huge task. Hazlitt shared my husband's belief and convictions. They both scorned wanting something for nothing and expecting pay for no work. One day I remember I was in bed with a sore throat. Lou came into my room with a manuscript under his arm. "Read this," he said. "I have just finished a book." It was Omnipotent Government. It was handwritten. I read it without a break from beginning to end, and I immediately knew it would be a success. If I could read a book of his, spellbound, without being able to stop, the public would go for it. In April 1943, Hazlitt wrote to Lou, "The Yale University Press has expressed an interest in seeing your manuscript. I suggest that you send it to Mr. Eugene Davidson at the Yale University Press." Lou did as he was advised, and a friendly and congenial relationship between Lou and Davidson soon developed. Once a month they met, usually for lunch, to discuss their publishing plans. Davidson wrote Hazlitt thanking him on December 16, 1943. "Yesterday Professor von Mises was here, in New Haven, settling the final details of his manuscript. Needless to say, we all feel the book will be a highly important and challenging contribution to present-day thought. We are immensely grateful to you for the share you have had in its completion." Norman V. Donaldson, director of the Yale University Press, shared Davidson's enthusiasm. 4 days later, Donaldson wrote to Lou, "It was fine that you could come up to New Haven and that we were able to accomplish so much. I do not need to tell you again that I have the highest hope for the book." On January 24, 1944, Davidson wrote, "The more I've been thinking about your views about bureaucracy, the more it has seemed to me that we ought to discuss very seriously the possibility of your writing them up in book form. Again and again I find myself remembering your vivid description of the branch office of the Yale University Press as compared with that of the Internal Revenue Service, and I'd be very much mistaken if a great many people wouldn't find that kind of statement clarifying their opinions." January 31st, Lou answered Davidson, "I am seriously considering your suggestion to write a small book on the economic and social problems of bureaucracy. It is a subject very tempting to me, and I think of real interest to a large public." Very quickly, on February 2, 1944, came Davidson's answer, "I am glad to know that you're giving serious consideration to the idea of writing a short book on bureaucracy. I'm glad to hear the proofs, Omnipotent Government, were in such good shape and were much nearer to publication. The choice for a subtitle for Omnipotent Government created some difficulties. Davidson proposed to meet on February 16th for lunch. We can discuss the subtitle and the bureaucracy book, and I hope we can report progress in both instances. At this luncheon, Lou must have agreed to write bureaucracy, for on March 1st, 1944, Davidson wrote to Lou, "Both George Parmley Day, chairman of the board, and Norman Donaldson were delighted to hear that you thought well of the idea of going ahead with the book on bureaucracy." And on March 3rd he wrote again, "I'm delighted to be able to tell you that our committee has been glad to approve our commissioning the book on bureaucracy. We all look forward to the successful outcome of this new venture." On June 2nd, 1944, Davidson could acknowledge receipt of the manuscript and wrote, "The manuscript seems fine to me. In fact, I think we have quite a book here. I wanted to get this word of my own enthusiasm for the new child off to you as quickly as possible." Omnipotent Government and Bureaucracy were the first books Lou had written in English, and the public response and the reviews were excellent. But these two books were only the beginning of the immense output of his writing in the United States. From the beginning, he was determined to revise Nationalökonomie for an English-speaking public. In December 1944, he sent Davidson this following summary of Nationalökonomie. "My objective in writing the treatise, Nationalökonomie, Theorie des Handelns und Wirtschaftens, was to provide a comprehensive theory of economic behavior, which would include not only the economics of a market economy, free enterprise system, but no less the economics of any other thinkable system of social cooperation, viz. Socialism, interventionism, corporatism, and so on. Furthermore, I deemed it necessary to deal with all of these objections, which, from various points of view, for instance, of ethics, psychology, history, anthropology, ethnography, biology, have been raised against the soundness of economic reasoning and the validity of the methods heretofore applied by the economists of all schools and lines of thought. Only such an exhaustive treatment of all critical objections can satisfy the exacting reader and convince him that economics is a science both conveying knowledge and able to guide conduct. The book starts accordingly from a general theory of human action, of which the behavior commonly called economic is only a special case. It analyzes the fundamental epistemological problems of the social sciences and determines the role assigned in their framework to economics. On the basis of these more general investigations, it then proceeds to a more thorough treatment of all problems of economics. The English language edition will not be a simple translation of the book published in German in Geneva in 1940. Besides the revision of the whole text, which will involve entirely rewriting some chapters, other important changes seem to be necessary in order to adapt the book better to the intellectual climate of America. In fact, an American reader approaches the economic problems from a different angle than the German reader, who is more or less under the spell of Hegelianism, the Nazi philosophy, and other isms, fortunately less popular in this country. It is, for instance, superfluous to America to refute the spurious doctrines of Werner Sombart and Ottmar Spann. The treatise is purely scientific and certainly not a popular book. However, as it does not use any technical terms, but those precisely defined and explained, it can be understood by every educated man. It is true that the public is at present not much interested in reading ponderous economic books, but the wide response which works discussing the most complicated questions of physics, biology, and the philosophy and epistemology of the natural sciences have found among our contemporaries proves that this lack of interest is not due to an aversion to occupation with intricate studies. It is very likely that the great issue of post-war reconstruction will stimulate interest in a book which deals exhaustively with such problems as prices, monopoly, money and credit, the business cycle and unemployment, and discusses thoroughly all proposals for an economic and social reform. On December 28th, Davidson thanked my husband and asked for the amount of advance he would need to do the book. And Davidson continued, "I can then take up the whole matter with the members of our executive committee soon after the first of the year." On January 15th, 1945, Davidson wrote to Hazlitt, "Mr. von Mises may have told you that we have discussed the possibility of his translating and partly rewriting his book Nationalökonomie. It would be a very real help if you could give us a statement of the book's importance. In order for our committee to approve a project of this size, they will want to be convinced of the width and depth and fundamental character of the contribution. My reason, of course, for writing this letter to you is that we greatly value your judgment, and are in your debt for having introduced von Mises to us in the first place. Hazlitt answered Davidson on January 18, 1945, referring him to men who knew Lou's work and could speak with authority about Nationalökonomie. It might be worth writing to some economists who may know this particular book, or who knew Mises' general work. Among these I may mention Fritz Machlup of the University of Buffalo, Professor Gottfried von Haberler, now at Harvard University, Dr. B. H. Beckert of Columbia, once a student of Mises, Professor John B. Van Sickle of Vanderbilt University, who I believe was also once a pupil of Mises, Professor B. M. Anderson of the University of California at Los Angeles, who is familiar with Mises' work, especially on monetary theory, Garrett, National Industrial Conference Board, and if you think there is time to reach them, Professors Lionel Robbins and F. A. von Hayek of the London School of Economics. On January 19, 1945, Mr. Davidson received this letter from Benjamin Anderson. In regard to your request about von Mises' Nationalökonomie, my own belief that it is important that it be published here is based on my knowledge of all the work of von Mises that has been published or translated into English, as well as the knowledge I have gained from conversations with him. I should like to say that, in my opinion, excellent as the two books are that Yale University Press has already published, the works that hitherto have been translated out of the original German are even better and more important. They are his works on socialism, an economic and sociological analysis, and the theory of money and credit. The first of these volumes was the first Mises volume I had ever read. It struck me as by far the most profound and important critique of the whole theory and implications of socialism that has ever been written, not excluding the classic work of bohm-bawerk, which was narrower in scope. Mises' theory of money and credit, Professor Lionel Robbins of the London School of Economics wrote in his introduction, has long been regarded as the standard textbook on the subject in continental circles. Nationalökonomie is von Mises' book on general economic principles. It is the central trunk, so to speak, of which the subject discussed in his book on money and his book on socialism are merely the branches. It is the fundamental theory of which the conclusions in the books on socialism and money are the corollaries. It is many years since a first-rate comprehensive book on basic economic principles has appeared in English. I think, therefore, that a book by von Mises, translated and brought up to date, would have a very important effect on economic thought in America. On February 1, 1945, Lou had a letter from Professor Hayek, in which Hayek informed him that he would be lecturing in April at Columbia, Chicago, Wisconsin, Oklahoma, and Stanford universities, and would see us the first days of April. Lou wrote to Hayek on February 23, 1945. The news of your impending lecture tour is very gratifying. It is almost a public sensation. You probably do not realize how great the success of your book is, The Road to Serfdom, and how popular you are in this country. The Yale Press plans to publish a revised English edition of my Nationalökonomie. I have already started to write it. But as the book is rather voluminous, and its publication involves a considerable investment, the press's new board wants to have a statement on the book's importance from a renowned economist. As practically no American economist reads foreign language books, you are the only scholar who could write such an appraisal. On July 1945, Lou sent Yale University Press's Donaldson another explanatory letter about Nationalökonomie, telling him, the German-language edition of my Nationalökonomie, published in 1940 in Switzerland, has 756 pages. For the English edition, I am trying to eliminate all critical references to European doctrines, unknown or long since discarded in the Anglo-Saxon countries. But on the other hand, I must deal more thoroughly than I did in the original edition with doctrines popular in America, especially with the Keynes-Hansen approach. I think these changes will shorten the length of the manuscript as compared with the 1940 text. I know very well that conciseness is one of the main virtues in a book, and I am eager to do my best. But a treatise dealing with the whole concept of economic problems must be more voluminous than a monograph. On May 7, 1948, the Yale University Press acknowledged receipt of parts of the manuscript. Eugene Davidson wrote, "The new section is here, and I am glad to see you are close to the goal now. Norman Donaldson has just reminded me of a serious oversight on our part, that we were to pay you as each section of the manuscript is received and approved. That clause in the contract completely slipped everyone's attention here, and please let me know how you would like the matter handled. That is, how you would prefer to have the installments reach you from here on. As a possibility, I would suggest that we make a lump payment for the months that have passed, and then continue according to schedule. But we will be pleased to meet your wishes." Lou answered on May 12, 1948. "Thanks for your letter of May 7th. I fully agree with your suggestion and leave the determination of the amount of the lump sum payment for the months past to your discretion." Nothing can prove more clearly how much the work meant to Lou, how little he cared for money, how completely he forgot about himself, than these two letters. By the spring of 1949, the printing of Human Action was well on its way. Davidson supervised everything. Not the slightest detail was unimportant to him. He wanted a perfect book and a satisfied author. He even sent Lou a proof of the binding of the book for his approval. On May 31, 1949, Norman Donaldson wrote to Lou, "Advance copies of your Human Action have now reached us, and we have sent one copy to you. Our probable publication date is September 14th. I hope you are pleased with the way the book has turned out. It is a big, handsome volume, and looks all of the $10 price that we are placing on it. May I take this occasion to extend to you my personal congratulations on your successful completion of this immensely important piece of work." Lou immediately confirmed receipt of the advance copy and thanked Donaldson. On June 7, 1949, Donaldson answered, "It is a great pleasure to have your note in response to your first copy of Human Action. We are delighted that you are so enthusiastic over the way the book looks." On September 14, 1949, Human Action was published, and the book created a tremendous impression all over the country. Almost 100 review copies were sent out, which may seem a small number in comparison to the 200 copies or more that publishers are sending out these days. On October 10, 1949, Donaldson wrote Lou, "Orders are keeping up splendidly, and we are today ordering a third printing." That was 3.5 weeks after publication. For the first time, life looked more hopeful to Lou. For years he had worked hard. In spite of his career in Europe, his excellent reputation, his respected writings, he had not found the same academic recognition in the United States that he had enjoyed in Europe. His financial position was, to say the least, modest and insecure, but Human Action was even more of a success than his two previous English books. Yale University Press did its utmost to answer all the inquiries about foreign translations. The book has now been published in Italian, Japanese, Spanish, and Chinese editions. I was told that Lou's most ardent readers and admirers have always been in the Spanish-speaking countries. Apparently, the more subjugated a country is, the deeper the longing for freedom. In the summer of 1983, the French translation, by Professor Raoul Audouin, was ready for publication and is now in the process of being printed. On January 9, 1950, Mr. Davidson informed Lou, "The Book of the Month Club will list Human Action in the back part of its monthly bulletin. This is, technically, I believe, known as the alternate selection, which may be chosen by the Book of the Month Club subscribers in place of the Book of the Month." This was, of course, very good news. Gradually the reviews appeared in the newspapers and the magazines. Lou was never offended or hurt by an unfavorable review, if they were based on knowledge and understanding. "The more they attack an author," he used to say, "the more curious they make the public. The only deadly attack is silence." Following the publication of Human Action, Yale University Press published a new enlarged edition of Socialism, which was first published in Germany in 1922 under the title Gemeinwirtschaft. In 1953, Yale printed a new enlarged edition of the Theory of Money and Credit, followed in 1957 by Lou's Theory and History, an interpretation of social and economic evolution. Next to Human Action, this book meant the most to Lou among his own writings. All these books were translated into foreign languages, which meant a good steady income for the Yale Press. On May 15, 1959, there was a short notice in the New York Times reporting that Norman V. Donaldson, director of the Yale University Press since 1945, will become chairman of its governing board on July 1st. George Parmley Day, the present chairman, will become chairman emeritus. Chester B. Kerr, secretary of the press since 1949, will succeed Mr. Donaldson as director. Eugene Davidson was not mentioned. He left Yale Press soon after to become its chief editor of Modern Age, an intellectually stimulating quarterly magazine. These changes completely altered Lou's relations with the press and brought the beginning of the greatest period of frustration he had ever suffered. I know of only 2 crises in Lou's life that so emotionally upset him that his physical well-being was affected. The first one came shortly after we were married. Lou received a letter in Geneva, dated Vienna, July 29, 1938, which stated, based on paragraph 4, section 1 of the Code for Reorganization for the Austrian Civil Functionaries, dated May 31, 1938, page 607, you are dismissed. This dismissal goes into effect with the day of receipt of this letter. No appeal is allowed against this dismissal. This from his native country after 27 years of devoted service as legal advisor and financial expert of the Chamber of Commerce in Vienna. But it was not altogether unexpected. Lou had foreseen the actions of the Nazis. He was much younger then and could recover from it. The second crisis came when the second edition of Human Action was in preparation. Human Action had been recognized as one of the great books of all time. After many years of hard work, fighting against odds with tremendous courage, Lou felt firm ground under his feet, and he looked forward with great anticipation to the new edition. But complaints against the press were coming in from all sides. Human Action had disappeared from bookstores. The second revised edition was delayed from month to month, and inquiries from readers were not being answered by the press. Even Lou's letters were not answered. He did not get the proofs in time to make the index, nor was he given the date of publication. They did not even send him a complimentary author's copy. In short, they treated the author and his work as they might have treated a young high school boy who timidly had sent him his first literary output. Finally, the long-awaited new edition of Human Action appeared. It was a shock to everyone. Henry Hazlitt, in Managing a Masterpiece, an article in the May 5, 1964 National Review, explained why. The press does not honor Professor Mises in this new edition, and it does not honor itself. The new edition is a typographical disgrace. The 1949 edition was originally priced at $10. The revised edition is offered at $15. Yet qualitatively it is cheaper in every respect. It is full of misprints. On page 322, 4 lines are omitted. Page 468 is missing altogether. Page 469 is printed twice. On page 563, 2 paragraphs are transposed. On page 615, 8 lines are wrong. The running heads that appeared at the top of each page of the 1949 edition are all gone. In belated reparation, the Yale University Press has printed errata pages, although they are not bound in. But these make wholly inadequate amends for an inexcusable printing job. On page after page, one finds some paragraphs printed in a comparatively light type, and others offered in a blacker, thicker type that can only be described as at least quasi-bold-face. The reader will inevitably assume that this marked contrast is intentional, and that the author meant to give special emphasis to the passages printed in accidental bold. I started to note merely the pages on which the contrast in type between various paragraphs was particularly glaring, and got a list of 70. I leave it to the Yale Press to explain the technical reasons for the type contrasts. I have said nothing about the uncountable instances in which whole pages of quasi-boldface are found opposite pages of lighter type. This must irritate any reader sensitive to typographical tidiness, but it is at least less likely to mislead him into supposing that changes in emphasis are intentional. What possible human explanation can there be for this typographical botch, which would disgrace a third-rate commercial publisher? Who read galley proofs? Who saw page proofs? Who let this mess pass? I asked Professor Mises what light he could throw on the matter. He was able to supply very little because the publishers had been extraordinarily reticent. It appears that, in order to do as cheap a job as possible, the press has resorted to some mixture of photo offset and reset never tried before. When Dr. Mises asked for page proofs, they were denied for mechanical reasons. When he protested, Chester Kerr, director of the press, replied on January 22, 1963, We are entirely willing to take responsibility for seeing that the new edition of Human Action is printed without error. I am confident that you will have no cause to regret not having seen page proofs. When the first copies were sent out to the distributors, the author did not receive one. The press has conceded in a letter of September 30th that the general quality of the work is undeniably below our customary standard. But it apparently does not intend to do anything but go on selling the new edition at $15. The least reparation that could be made to the author and to the readers of Human Action would be to order the press to start on a new edition immediately, instead of waiting till the botched present edition is exhausted, and meanwhile to sell copies of the present edition at a cut price in candid recognition of their defectiveness. A final question. Why, in a press that has shown itself capable of producing first-rate work, did this particular book go wrong? Do the present editors of the Yale University Press, who are not those who originally accepted the book, know that this is the most important work on general economic theory that has appeared in our generation? They know it is commercially profitable. They know it sold 6 printings and brought in revenues from translation and quotation. But if they had any idea of its true greatness, if they even had any real respect for its author and its readers, if they had any respect for their press's own reputation, would they have permitted such a slovenly edition to go out under its imprint? I was with Lou during all those days of upset. No one else will know what he went through at that time, for he was not a man to show his feelings in public. Outsiders may have considered the misprinting of Human Action an episode in the life of a great man, accepted and forgotten. But it was not so. It was the only time in his life that he had sleeping problems, though he steadfastly refused to take any pills. He was angry. It was an ice-cold, quiet anger directed against what he felt was an unknown enemy at Yale University Press, menacing his great book, his creative strength, his very existence. He only regained his composure after he signed a new contract with Regnery and saw the active interest that Henry Regnery took in bringing out a new edition of Human Action. And when I noticed that Lou's sleep was sound and regular, as in former years, I knew he got back his philosophical inner balance. But he never forgot this traumatic experience, nor have I. The depth of Lou's feeling is revealed in this letter he sent to a friend in December 1963. You are perfectly right. The typographical makeup of the new revised edition of my book Human Action, as published by the Yale University Press, is a shocking scandal. Never before has any decent publisher dared to bring out such a defective product. There is, first of all, the strikingly perceptible difference in the heaviness of the impression between the passages that have been retained unchanged from the first edition and those that have been altered or added. With the former, the print is darker. With the latter, it is lighter. This must necessarily give the reader the erroneous idea that this difference means something, that the author wanted to make some distinction between the content of the lighter and that of the darker paragraphs or lines. The book is full of misprints. One page was entirely omitted. Another was printed twice. Paragraphs were transposed, others were left out. The text is marred by blurs and other marks that impair its readability, especially as many of them look like periods, accents, or other signs of punctuation. There are no running heads, and there are many other minor defects that disfigure the book. There are 2 ways open for the explanation of this disgraceful case of botchery. It was either unintentional or intentional. If we were to assume that it was unintentional, we would imply that all the people who cooperated in the production of the volume are clumsy, inept, inefficient, and negligent in the highest degree. Against such an assumption stands the fact that the press published and still publishes books of normal quality. To a professor who complained to the press about the poor appearance of the book and told them that their reputation will suffer, the press answered, September 12th, that its reputation does not depend on this one instance, but on the accumulative flow of high-quality work which comes from us steadily. Thus the press itself comes near to admitting that its failure to produce the new edition of Human Action as a book of normal American shape was the result of a purposeful design to prejudice both the circulation of the book and the reputation and material interests of the author. The present management of the press regrets, for political reasons, the fact that their predecessors published my books. They are especially angry about the great success of Human Action. If they had any sense of propriety at all, they would openly tell the author that they do not want any longer to publish his books, and that he is free to look for another publisher. When in the course of seeing the book through the various phases of publication, I noticed how the press insidiously delayed from month to month the publication of the new edition of Human Action, and how it muddled the printing presses, I suggested this solution to them. But the press does not want to lose the very lucrative rights to Human Action. While the press, as it told the representative of a distributor who ordered copies of the books, loses money on about 90% of its publications, Human Action sold 6 printings and brought in revenues from translation and quotation. It was a very profitable job for the press. The press wants to make money on my books and at the same time to punish the author as well as the readers by giving them the most wretched service. Without informing me, the press chose for the publication of the new edition of Human Action a process devised by an incompetent bungler and never tried before. The inadequacy of this procedure delayed the production for many months and finally gave the press pretext to deny me, for mechanical reasons, the right to see the page proofs. When I protested, Mr. Chester Kerr, the director of the press, replied on January 22nd, "We are entirely willing to take responsibility for seeing that the new edition of Human Action is printed without error. I am confident that you will have no cause to regret not having seen page proofs." It is obvious that the press withheld from me the page proofs because it wanted to bring out a defective book. And when the book was finally ready and the first copies were sent out to the distributors, the press tried to keep the fact secret from me and did not even send me, the author, a copy. The press cannot help admitting, in a letter to my attorney on September 30th, that the general quality of the work is undeniably below our customary standard, but it stubbornly refuses to substitute a new normal quality book for this scandalous botchery. In writing this letter, I am not concerned with the reaction of the Yale University press. What I do want to do is thank all those who, in reading the new revised edition of Human Action, take no notice of the glaring deficiencies of its printing, and thus thwart the heinous machinations of the simpletons who think that they can refute an author by mangling the outward appearance of his book. The villain in a Perry Mason story is easy to detect. It is always the one whom you suspect least, and whom the author treats with a certain indulgent negligence. But who was the guilty party causing the unbelievably bad printing job at Yale University Press? Whom prepared the second edition of Human Action? Who wanted to harm my husband by preventing, with this unbelievably bad printing, the book from being read? Was Eugene Davidson the only person whose support had brought Human Action to life? I don't know any other time in my husband's life when he had to consult a lawyer, except in 1938 when he needed legal help to obtain my documents from Vienna. It was claimed that no lawyer ever would win a case against the Yale University Press. If this was the case, why was the press so eager, after all the bad publicity it had, to hush-hush the affair and settle with my husband's lawyers out of court, giving in to almost all his demands? These demands never involved any money, as is clearly seen from the foregoing letter. And why, since the case was so strong and the right so clearly on my husband's side, did the lawyers give in without trying their case before a jury? The mystery is unsolved to this day. The Yale University Press answered all charges with deadly silence. That was their defense. Yale University Press is a faithless organization that is so huge, so powerful, that if attacked, the responsible party can hide unrecognized behind the impenetrable walls of the institution, as in the past warriors might have hidden behind the ramparts of a fortress. But one thing is sure. The ideological differences that may have existed between Ludwig von Mises and the Yale University Press did not hinder the press from taking its cut. All through the years, the press insisted on its contract and its percentage. Every year, when the Yale statement arrived, Lou read it, then gave it to me without a word. But the shrug of his shoulders and his slight gesture of contempt revealed his feelings more clearly than words ever could.